probably been on for a whole minute. Okay. So, welcome. Today, we are talking about a new topic. We finished Providence. I don't know if I made that clear last time or not, but we finished Providence. Today, we are talking about miracles. And it's going to be a couple, I don't know how long it's going to be. It could be quick, it could be, and I don't know, it depends. We'll see. I'm in the research right now, so I'm going to present to you today with where I'm at, and we're going to go from there. So I'm not completely done. I don't have conclusions. So instead today, we're going to do something a little different than what we normally do, a little different approach, right? And, hello. How's it going? Yep. Yep. Yeah, it's right here. Come on in. All right. So the question to start discussion is this. I'll start with this question. What is a miracle? What is a miracle?
Something that cannot be explained by worldly means.
Something that cannot be explained by worldly means. Okay, does anyone disagree or agree with that?
I would say that's a little too general, because there are some, phenomena like quantum physics. There are some things we don't know. It's like the observer effect. The observer particle behaves differently. So I would say more specifically, a miracle is an act by someone in God's name to better someone else's life.
Okay, an act by someone in God's name to better someone else's life. Okay. Now, did we hear the objection to, did we understand that? Explain again, what was the tweak you made based off that definition?
It's less that it's just something that we can explain and more something that is done by the power of God.
So it's not just something that we can't explain, but more so that's something that's done by the power of God. What's wrong with having the definition of something that we can't explain? We don't know everything. So there's things that we might not be able to explain that we might say, oh, that's a miracle because we can't explain it. Oh, the moon, look, it's now in the crescent phase. Miracle. Is that miracle just because you can't explain it? Fair point. There might have been a lot of things that people would have said a miracle 200 years ago that perhaps today they would say, well, now we understand scientifically why this occurred, why this medically, why drinking this made you not die, right? Yeah, so it's a valid point. Any other more precise, perhaps, definitions of a miracle? What would you say? Something supernatural. Okay, supernatural. And you define that as it doesn't follow the laws of nature. Supernatural. Okay, doesn't follow the laws of nature. It goes beyond or above or breaks or whatever you want to say. Not within the norms of nature. Yeah? Any objections? If so, why? Okay, all right. Next question is, have you ever experienced a miracle? You personally, not heard a story, but you personally. No one's brave enough to raise hand? Okay.
For me, not something that was, insane or really crazy, but I just felt, when I was in a really hard time in my life, I just felt the love of God very strongly. It almost came it felt like somebody was giving me a hug, and I couldn't explain that. There was nothing that could have given me that feeling unless it was from God, and so that was a miracle.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? Anyone else want to share?
Less for me specifically, but more, well, I guess it does pertain to me specifically, but the fact that I'm here kind of is a miracle. I'm a quadruplet, which is twins but twice, and the fact that I'm healthy and alive from that is pretty remarkable.
Okay. I like it. I like to hear it. This is good. Good start of discussion. So, what we're doing differently today than normally what I have is I have a bunch of research and a bunch of lesson and theology, and already all of it's prepared, and I just throw it at you and pretty much preach it, right? Today it's a little bit different. It's the same, but in a little bit of a different format, right? Because I wanted to kind of give us an opportunity to give some practical hermeneutics, right? Interpretation of the Bible. And so I thought this is a great topic because the word miracle itself, before we get into all these questions about miracles, their nature, how they're performed, what goes on. There's so many questions we could be asking, so many topics we could start addressing. But even before addressing that, just the basic question of what is a miracle I think it deserves a lot of attention. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to try to do a word study on the word miracle in the Bible. Because there's a lot of disagreement about what a miracle is. That's why I asked the question, what is a miracle? And the more people you have in the room, the more definitions you're going to have of what a miracle is. And maybe some will agree more, some will disagree, but let's try to get a biblical perspective of the word itself, miracle. So, what is a miracle? How do we define miracle? How do we come up with a definition for even just a word like miracle? Do we go to Google and Google the word miracle? Well, you could do that, but is that going to necessarily be the biblical definition? No, not necessarily. And so it seems some people will say a miracle is when the impossible becomes possible. So it's something impossible and now it's possible with God. Others might say a miracle is when God suspends natural laws and does something supernatural like we already addressed. Others might say a miracle is whenever God directly acts in creation. Others might use the term more loosely in the sense that, well, meeting a friend that you didn't expect in the grocery store, someone might say, well, that's a miracle. Someone else might look at that and say, well, that's not a miracle. That wasn't going beyond the laws of nature. That was a coincidence that maybe God orchestrated, right? So what is the definition of miracle? Who's right? How do we define terms? It's a good question because you could really take any word in the Bible and realize that just take the word justification and have everybody in the room define it in a paragraph. They're all going to be relatively different. Take any word, grace, define it. Love, define it. How do we define our terms? And when you're talking to someone and use a word like grace, love, justification, miracle, does that person think the same thing when you say that word as what you're thinking? Not necessarily, right? So often, instead of using these key phrases as a Christian, what you want to do in discussion with someone, especially if you find that there's some level of disagreement, often you realize, okay, we need to move beyond these words that we think we know what they mean and get into more basic kindergartner level English to figure out what we're talking about here. Do I understand what we're saying? So that's real practical, I feel like, what we can do. So how do we define a miracle? So my thinking was that in order to get a definition of miracle, you got to look at how the word is used in the Bible. That's the best way to look at it. And I guess I want to look at the biblical usage of the term and the way the Bible uses it. And so first we'll start with the Old Testament. So buckle up. This isn't your normal study. This isn't your normal Bible study. To some, this might be the most boring thing ever. I hope it's not. I had fun doing it, okay? It's going to be different. I don't think how many of you have done a word study or even know what that means? All right, there you go, a word study. How many of you have gone and just, let me look at 100 verses in the Bible with this word and try to figure out what this word means based off those 100 verses? There you go. Okay, so it's not something that most Christians do, though, on the regular with Bible study or even in a Bible study group at all. So, all right, we're going to start with the Old Testament, and the first word is Pele. Anyone heard the word? All right, so Pele is a word that basically means wonder. This word does not directly translate to miracle, and soon you will learn there's actually not a single word in the Old or New Testament that directly translates to the word miracle. That word actually doesn't come necessarily from the Greek or the Hebrew. It's completely different language etymology. We can get to that later. So that word itself doesn't even come straight from Scripture. So how do we define it? Well, there's other words the Bible uses. Pele is the first word, and it basically means wonder. Right? You see signs and wonders, right? The wonderful works of God. Wonder. So if you want to write Pele, wonder. There you go. That word itself as a noun, now we're going to get into distinctions. As a noun, Pele is 13 times in the Bible, okay? And I went ahead, and for all these words that we're going to bring up and all these occurrences, I went ahead and looked at every single verse in the Bible using these words. And I looked at the verses, and I looked at the context to try to figure out what it means. But I'm pretty much just going to try to give you a little bit more of the summary. But for this first one, we'll go through it. Exodus 15:11. And you don't necessarily have to write down all these verses if you want to, but it's just to get a point across. In Exodus 15:11, it talks about God as working miracles, right? God works wonders, it says. God, he's the one who works wonders. You don't have to flip through all these. I'm going to go rapid fire. Psalm 77:11, it talks about we need to remember God's wonders. Psalm 77:14, God who works wonders. Psalm 78:12, God who did marvelous or wonders in Egypt. Psalm 88:10, God who performs wonders. Psalm 88:12, will God's wonders be made known? Psalm 89:5, will praise your wonders, O Lord. I wrote 199, but that's not right. It's probably 119. Psalm 119:129, God's testimonies are wonderful. Isaiah 9:6, he will be called Wonderful Counselor. Isaiah 25:1, God worked wonders. Isaiah 29:14, God will do a marvelous work. Lamentations 1:9, therefore Jerusalem's fall is, most translations say terrible, but it's the same exact word for wonders. It's just since it's a negative sense, we're using the word terrible. But actually, I think KJV often does still have the word terrible for God, right? Terrible is not necessarily, it used to not, today we associate it as a negative thing, terrible, right? But before it was like, God is terrible. Someone would think, wow, how dare you say that? No, that's what the word used to mean. It just meant wonder, right? Wonder, terror, awesome. Today, the word awesome doesn't mean anything for most people. It's like, oh yeah, awesome. I get to, go to school tomorrow. Or the opposite. I get to not go to school tomorrow. Awesome. It's like, no, that's not inspiring awe within you that you're like, awe is like the first time you've looked at Niagara Falls and you're like, awesome. That's more accurate to the word awesome. Thank you. I like the participation. Daniel 12:6, how long until the end of these wonders? And it's in context, it's referring to the tribulation that it's talking about. So I just quickly breezed through those 13 occurrences in the Bible for the noun Pele, which means wonders. What is something you notice about that word and its relation to God? It's not like a trick question. Just give me your thoughts. What have you noticed? Every single time that word is used, who else is mentioned? Pretty much every single time God is mentioned, right? So it's interesting. So that's something I noticed. And this is something you could do with a word study. Okay, the word wonders, when it's a noun, every single time it's referring to God. God connected with the noun wonders. That's interesting. It's never a person performing wonders, the noun. But don't get that confused with the verb. There's a verb, pala, where it is connected with people. So the next thing is pala, and it's very closely related, and it basically has the meaning, it's similar to wonders, but it basically has the meaning of extraordinary. Not extraordinary, no, extraordinary in the literal sense. It's extraordinary, it's surpassing. It is beyond norm. It's extraordinary. And so there are 71 occurrences in the Bible. We're not going to go through all 71 occurrences, but I will give a few examples of a few of the different ways that it seems to be used. But keep in mind, through all these verses that we're about to go through, it's the same word. Just the English translations will translate that word differently to try to capture the meaning based off the context. And so when you're doing a word study, you don't necessarily say, oh, this word is used, it's translated in English, this, therefore the word means all of those things. Not necessarily. What that means is when the translators were translating that word, they were trying to use an equivalent word to capture the same meaning. However, there just happened not to be a perfect equivalent word to capture the meaning in all the contexts, right? And that's just the nature of language. If you've ever tried to translate between different languages, you will realize quickly that often there are expressions and words and wording that do not perfectly translate between any two languages ever, right? There's always going to be slightly different words. There's no perfect synonyms, right? You're going to think like good and great is the same thing if you translate it across languages, but it's not, because good and great, even in English, are completely different words, right? So now let's look at the word pala, the verb, basically meaning wonderful or extraordinary or surpassing. So the first few uses of it has more, I won't actually give the definition. I'm going to give a few verses, and then we'll try to see if we can come up with the definition based off these verses. So in 2 Samuel 13:2, it's the description of Amnon, and we all know the story. Amnon knew, it says, that it was pala to do anything to his sister, right? And it says in the negative sense. It was beyond his pala, right? It was beyond his power to do anything to his sister. And so in the narrative, this word is used to describe his inability to do what he wanted to do. Okay? That's interesting. Pala, right? It's this word that means extraordinary, surpassing, right? Wonderful. Deuteronomy 30, verse 11, it says, and I'm paraphrasing, keeping these commandments that were just listed are not beyond one's power, a translation might say. They're not beyond pala. And in the context, the word is used to tell us that it is within our ability to keep these commands that God gave them. Okay? Here's another one, Genesis 18:14. And the quote is anything, and the translation will say, is anything too difficult for Yahweh, for Sarah to have a son? Right? And so based off these three verses, what is the definition that you might assume for this word, pala, that fits all three of those? Beyond ability. Okay, there you go. And so this is in the negative sense, right? It is beyond ability to do. And so in the positive sense, you might say, well, God has ability to do what perhaps is beyond someone else's ability. So in this, it's like from the negative sense, okay? So beyond one's power. I think of it as can't do, beyond ability, yeah. All right, that might be part of the definition, part of the meaning of the original word. You got to keep that in mind, okay? Let's give a few more verses. Psalm 131, verse 1, David says, paraphrasing, okay? This is the James translation. I'm not prideful. I don't concern myself with great matters, nor things too profound for me. And the word there is, nor things pala for me. Okay? So, and one translation was like, too profound for me. Again, similar to beyond ability, right? But this time it's referring to understanding. Proverbs 30, verse 18. 3 things are pala for me. Yes, 4 which I do not understand. 3 things are too wonderful for me. Yes, 4 which I do not understand. Okay. Now we're seeing the word wonder, but it seems to be in terms of understanding, right? Job 42, verse 3. Knowledge I have uttered which I do not understand. Things too pala for me which I did not know. Things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Deuteronomy 17, verse 8. If arises for you a matter too difficult, pala, too difficult to judge between degree of guilt for bloodshed, then bring it to Yahweh. So based off these words, what now is the definition of pala, the verb? What's the last verse, or am I like quiet? Last verse was Deuteronomy 17:8. If there arises for you a matter that is too difficult, right there's the word pala, a matter too difficult, pala. By the way, too difficult, kind of like ignore those words and just imagine the word pala instead, right? There's a matter too difficult to judge between, then bring it to Yahweh. So what's the definition of the word? Sure, I guess beyond comprehensive ability, okay. Beyond comprehension, beyond understanding, beyond ability, okay. So this is carrying the idea of the word. It's used in that sense, all right? So we've already kind of defined it using some words as well beyond your power, beyond your ability. Now it seems to also be beyond understanding or ability, which ability could encompass understanding and action as well. Let me give you a few more. this might change the meaning a little bit, but it shouldn't because it's the same word that uses these verses. 2 Samuel 1:27, where it's, and this is, I think, a really interesting one. This is David talking to Jonathan. He says, I am distressed for you, right, my brother Jonathan. You have been pleasant to me. Your love was very Paula to me, surpassing the love of woman. Interesting. See, now we have the use, not in the negative sense of, oh, beyond my ability, but it's actually for the first time used in the positive sense where there's a human saying towards another human that this human's love towards him, this companionship, this friendship between Jonathan and David, was Paula. Now that's interesting because that's actually a real big exception to the rule. Most of the uses are not like this, right? So that's interesting. David, sure, David liked figure of speech. He was a poet. He wrote a lot of psalms. Could this be figurative of speech? Perhaps. You can't rule that out. There's not really any good way to rule that out because it's just his statement. Yeah, go ahead. That was 2 Samuel 1:27. David describing Jonathan's love towards him. Let's do a couple more. Psalm 119, verse 18. Open my eyes that I may see, Paula, wondrous things from your law. Okay. Psalm 118:23. Yahweh, doing this is marvelous in our eyes. Okay. Psalm 139:14. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and Paula made, wonderfully made. And then Paula are your works. Marvelous are your works. So based off those words, what might you say the definition of Paula is? See, it feels like it keeps changing a little bit based off the verses. But we got to remember, the correct definition of the word must be able to be used or encompassed for all of those verses. And that's the challenge. That's the game. That's the puzzle with word studies. Trying to figure out what the word actually means, not just what Google says, not just, well, it could mean this, therefore it's this. No, it could be this, but it could also be a whole host of things. So it's kind of like a process of elimination. You start saying, okay, well, it means this, but this wouldn't really fit there if it's that specific. So maybe we push back a little bit, something more encompassing, right?
So I would kind of think it would be something that is like, that a natural man couldn't do, right? It would require godly power. But then that whole 2 Samuel one kind of throws that definition off. Unless it was being symbolic and he's saying like, you almost have like a godlike.
See, I'm glad you said that, and I try to really emphasize the fact that it's an exception and that it could be, I think the point might be missed a little bit there. I think, my theory, this isn't scripture, this isn't Bible, this isn't I've read anywhere from theologians, but I'm leaning in that direction as well. I think David it's almost like me going and, Paul saying the love of Christ, right? It's just like, well, okay, you're never literally going to perfectly have that same love of Christ that he has for the church, right? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. It's like, okay, that's the standard, that's the exception. And I think that, yeah, David is using a term, using something that might be. Now, but before we conclude that, we don't know. It's a theory, right? It's a theory. But I think it's a really good one. So let me do a couple more. Here's another one that's going to actually, no, not yet. I have another curveball I'll give at you later. But first we're going to do this one. Daniel 11:36. Me paraphrasing. The king will do according to his will. He will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god and shall speak Paula against the God of gods. Well, now it's like, what? What word fits there? What definition fits there? I'll read that again. The king will do according to his will and exalt himself and magnify himself above every god and shall speak Paula against the God of gods. And I love this example because if you look at a bunch of different translations, sometimes there's a verse where every translation is like the same. This verse right here, this word right here, has so many different words that different translations try to use. Let me give you a couple of them. One translation says, He will exalt himself above every god and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. Another one will say astonishing things against the God of gods. Another one will say unheard of things against the God of gods. Another thing will say outrageous things against the God of gods. Dreadful things against the God of gods. Blasphemous things against the God of gods. It's interesting how they all try to use a word to capture the meaning, right? So what is correct? Well, we know that the word there is Paula, and it's some word that has something to do that is the same as all the other usages of the verses that we saw. So we like to think of the word wonderful in a positive sense. Can wonderful be used in a negative sense, just like terrible can be used in a positive sense? I think so. Why not? If you take a more literal biblical definition of the word wonder, wonderful. Because, well, from our perspective, God doing these wonders on Egypt, we might say, from the Egyptians' perspective, God doing these wonders upon Egypt might be a terrible thing, right? So that's another thing to consider. So in Daniel 11:36, this king, whoever this is describing, right? We're not going to get into eschatology right now. But this king, whoever it is, and whatever this description is, he will magnify himself above every god and shall speak Pala things against the God of gods. Extraordinary, wonderful, terrible. This exaggerated term, beyond norm, beyond typical, things that you would marvel at if you heard, right? Moving on, Job 37, verse 5. And here it's actually used as an adverb. It doesn't make too much of a difference, but still. It says, God marvelously does great things and we cannot comprehend. Okay, God's doing it. Simple. Daniel 8:24. Again, Daniel throwing curveballs at us. This is a prophecy that seems to be describing Antichrist, depending on your eschatology. And it says, his power will be mighty, but not by his own power, and he will destroy to an extraordinary degree, to a Pala degree. He will destroy Pala-ly, adverb. Similar to what we just saw in the other Daniel verse. Marvelously, astonishingly, outrageously, dreadfully, terribly, right? This exaggerated word that's not an exaggeration, but extraordinarily, marvelously. So the word in itself does not necessarily have to mean good or bad, okay? But it's describing a degree of something, right? Moving on. Exodus 3, verse 20 is where it says God will strike the Egyptians with wonders. And by the way, all these examples are verbs. We did noun, the first 13 occurrences. The rest of this is verbs / adverb. Exodus 3:20, God will strike Egyptians with wonders. Judges 6:13, where there's the question, where are God's wonders? Pala. Jeremiah 21:2, where it says, perhaps Yahweh will deal with us according to his wonderful works. 1 Chronicles 16:9 speaks of God's wonderful works. Psalm 26, verse 7, God's wonderful works. Exodus 34, verse 10, God will do marvels. Joshua 3:5, tomorrow Yahweh will do among you wonders. And in that context, we know it's definitely referring to something miraculous, especially. Job 9:10, God does wonders. Micah 7:15, God will show wonders as in Egypt. Psalm 78:11, God's wonders, and there's more examples of those. So these, all in context, have something in common. These are wonders. We'll use the word wonders, because in general, wonders, encompasses it pretty well, I would say. Pala, wonders. But these in context have to do with acts of judgment or redemption, right? Now here's the real big curveball. Ready? But I think it's actually helpful because it restricts the definition. If it just keeps saying verses that says God does wonders, we don't know what it means, right? But once we see these curveballs, that's what helps us restrict the definition, okay? Ready? Leviticus 22:21. When someone offers a sacrifice of peace offerings to the Lord to Pala a vow or for a voluntary offering of the herd or of the flock, it must be without defect to be accepted. There shall be no defect in it. Now, if you're confused, I was so confused when I'm like, how can this possibly mean wonders? What is this? What is the connection here? What does this have to do with a miracle, right? Well, I'll read it again. When someone offers a sacrifice of peace offerings, we're not going to get into all the details, but there was a whole bunch of different types of sacrifices: burnt offering, trespass offering, wave offering, peace offering, all that, guilt offering. So, peace offering. When you're offering a peace offering to the Lord, and then some translations will say, I'll give you a couple different translations, peace offering to the Lord to fulfill a special vow. Peace offering to the Lord to accomplish a vow. Peace offering to the Lord to fulfill a vow. So that's the word. But the word there is pala. Right? Pala, fulfill, accomplish a special vow. Pala. So based off what we already know about the word, what do we think the meaning of that verse then is? And what has to do with a vow? I'm just doing a lot of questions today and a lot of thinking today. Normally, I just go ahead and give all the answers, right? But here, the goal is to have us all go through the thought process. For some of us, this is brand new. For some of us, hopefully some of us have done this to an extent. I'm not claiming this is the perfect way to do it, but it is a way to think about it and to realize that. This is something that really bugs me, okay? When there's you're listening to a sermon and then someone says, I went ahead and looked and I Googled the definition. I'm like, no, you can't just Google it. Google will give you the wrong definition half the time. Yeah, especially because if you click on Google's definition and then click the arrow and then all of a sudden it gives you 10 more definitions, you're like, you can't just pick one. You can't just pick and choose and take the one you like, right? It's a lot harder. Why do you think there's so many different translations? If there's a KJV onlyist, sorry. But the reason being is because language evolves, language has meaning. It's difficult to choose the right word from Greek to English or from Hebrew to English. It's difficult to do that. That's why there's so much disagreement about what the right word is to use. And there's many different smart scholars out there, a lot smarter than me, who have done a lot of work, right? But I kind of want to get a little the action, Anyway, so what was my question earlier? What might be the meaning of this verse, Leviticus 22:21, in relation to vows, based off what we know what the word pala is? Any thoughts? Any brave souls? Did I lose everyone? Not seeing it. Okay, fine, I'll give it away. I think, all right, the context is this. This is an offering given to God. Oh yeah, go ahead, perfect.
I think within the context of this verse, pala is, it's a wonder without blemish. It's perfect and complete.
So what is the wonder of the fact that it is perfect?
Yeah.
Interesting. What do y'all think?
Fixes the vow problem.
I'm going to push back on that because there are other times where the command is given to have something without blemish where it does not use pala, right? And I know that's not maybe the perfect argument, and we would have to look deeper to really, truly, answer whether or not that's right. But there are other times, like when it talks about the burnt offering, it does say it has to be without blemish. There's a lot of offerings that say without blemish, and a lot of them don't say pala. But this one does. I'm being a little unfair to you. I have a couple more verses I want to throw at you with vows that I think will help answer this. Anyone else want to say something before we move on? Okay, all right, great. Now let me give you a couple more. Ready? Two more times, actually a few more times, the same word pala is used in terms of vows. In Numbers 15:3, it pretty much says the same thing. A sacrifice in performing a special vow, or fulfilling a special vow, or fulfilling a vow, the translations will say. So it's a similar idea. Numbers 15:8 has the same exact wording as Numbers 15:3, so we don't have to read it again. So those two use that word pala again. But here's another one. Leviticus 27, verse 2, again uses pala with a vow, and it says, when someone, and then some translations will say, makes an explicit vow to Yahweh, or makes a special vow to Yahweh, or makes a singular vow to Yahweh, or consecrates by a vow to Yahweh. The word there is pala with vow, and they all try to translate what that means. What is pala with a vow? See, we're here trying to do what the translators do. Here's the Greek word. Here's what we feel that this word means based off its usage. Here's how we phrase it correctly in English to encapsulate its meaning, right? How to interpret Bible 101 is what we're doing here. Let me give you another verse. Wait, we already read Numbers 6:2, didn't we? No, we did not. Numbers 6:2 says something very similar, but it says it in regards to a, ready? Nazirite vow. Now, I think that helps us with the meaning a little bit, okay? Does anyone have Numbers 6:2 open, actually? Do you want to read it? And also, King James Version? Great. Can you read it out loud?
Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of the Nazarites, to separate themselves unto the Lord.
All right, thank you. So, again, a vow, but here it's mentioned that it's a Nazarite vow. And it's interesting it uses, again, pala with the vow, when it's to vow a vow. Why is it? It sounds weird to say to vow a vow. Yeah, but then it uses pala there. Pala, and the Greek is weird with the way grammar works. So you can't translate it perfectly, but it has pala there with the vow. And the key is that it's a Nazarite vow. And I feel like that it helps us.
Would you explain a little bit what a Nazarite vow is? I'm unfamiliar with that part.
Sure. Actually, I'm going to leave that open to the room. Anyone want to explain a little bit what a Nazarite vow is? Go ahead.
Numbers 6 actually talks about that.
How many verses is it about? Actually, if you have it right there in front of you, do you want to start reading it?
It just says, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar or wine, or vinegar or strong drink. Neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dry.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he's not going to drink and be drunk.
Yeah.
All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. All the days of the vow of his separation, there shall no razor come upon his head, until the days be fulfilled.
So no shaving the hair.
Separateth himself unto the Lord, and he shall be holy, and shall let the locks of the hair out of his head grow.
There's one more thing that I'm surprised it doesn't mention it there. There might, what's that? Oh, what's the next verse?
All the days that he separated himself unto the Lord, he shall come at no dead body.
There we go. No dead body. Samson violated all three of those, right? He cut his hair, he touched the carcass of the lion, and although that's debatable, dead body, what does that mean? Some people interpret it to mean dead thing in general, right? Because that made you unclean, especially with a Nazarite vow, where you're really just taking it a step further to consecrate yourself, make you special, separated to the Lord, right? Not only was it you can't get drunk, but it specifically mentioned you can't even touch a grape, right? That's like, whoa, we're getting a little extreme here, right? As a Christian, it is illegal to get drunk. Yes, that's every Christian. As a Nazarite, you're taking a step further and saying, I will not even touch. If this comes into contact with me, I feel defiled. If I touch the grape, I'm defiled. If I look at it, no, I'm okay. Taking it a step further, right? But that's what they did. They said, God commanded that we do this. I'm going to vow to even take it a step further, right? In order to, the idea really is to especially consecrate myself. I want to be holy. I don't want to sin. I want to stay as far away from it as possible. And that's really the statement you're making. And so you're going to walk around and you're going to see some guy and he's got super long hair. It's probably going to be up in some type of, it's not going to be hanging on the floor. But that right away tells you something about that person. Just like if you walk across the Pharisee, oh, he's a Pharisee. You can tell. Hey, Nazarite vow. You can tell. I'm not going to offer him alcohol, right? So that's kind of the idea of a Nazarite, So, and I'm glad it's actually right in that context. We could just read it. So in the context, vow, I take it to mean something like this, okay? You could disagree with me if you want, but you'll have to have a reason why you disagree, okay? In the context, I take it to mean something of an extraordinary vow. I take it to mean that. Because there are other vows described and rules, right, about how you take those vows and what you do, but it doesn't use the word pala there. But here it describes this, something that seems to be beyond that. One of those examples is a Nazarite vow, but it's not limited to Nazarite vows. There are other vows that you can take that are beyond normal vows that you might take that I think the word, it just makes it mean it's a wonderful vow. It's an extraordinary vow. It's something beyond norm, right? I take it to mean that. If you object, speak now. I'm like 80% sure. All right.
I don't object, actually. I was just going to say, I think that's a really good definition because, especially, it seems like with the vows, every time it talks about it, that it has to be done with the Lord, right? So that it's an extraordinary vow specifically involving it needs more power than just what someone can do.
There's also a couple interesting things about the Nazirite vow is, do you guys know what happened when you finished a Nazirite vow? How you completed it? Okay, there was this whole ritual. It's described in Acts actually, where there was these people that were finishing their vow. I might be quoting this wrong, but there was a vow that there were these Jews finishing, and then the idea was, hey, Paul, you go and pay for these people to finish their vow and consecrate themselves at the temple, and you yourself go and offer and consecrate at the temple, really to go and show the Jews that you're not against the law, right? And you cut your hair, there's this whole process. You purify all your hair, you shave everything. Some people say that'll include the eyebrows and, and the beard and everything. You shave it all off, you offer these sacrifices that God, right? And it's like, that's interesting because there's other vows that you can make, even in the Old Testament that you would make, that did not require all of this extra. So this is an extra special vow. And these translations get it, they get it right. You're making a special vow. It's special. There's something extraordinary about it, right? There's something marvelous about it, right? I wouldn't really say there's something terrible about it, but in some way, in some convoluted sense, someone might look at that and say, that's terrible. It's like, look at all you have to go through. From the negative perspective, you might call that terrible, to have to do that. So, moving on. Only a couple more, and remember, I think there was 71 uses. We're not going to go through all of them, but I'll give you a couple more. Isaiah 28, verse 29. Yahweh, who is wonderful in the context, right? He's wonderful in counsel. Deuteronomy 28, 59. Yahweh will bring Pala plagues upon you. Extraordinary plagues, right? There are the normal plagues that go around. Then Yahweh's going to have these plagues special, right, on you. It's going to be a bit more. Isaiah 29:14, God does a marvelous work. Joel 2:26, God has dealt with you wondrously. Judges 13:19, Manoah offered that food offering that he was commanded to give, and then Yahweh did a Pala thing in regards to the offering. He did a wonderful thing. If you remember, the staff, bam, fire, flame. Okay. So based on the usage of the word from all that we've seen, what can we say about its meaning? What carries some of that meaning? What are some words we could use or some concepts we could use to try to describe, okay, what is the meaning of Pala? What does it mean? I'll start. Wonder. Wonder. Wonderful, wondrous, right? What else could we use to try to encompass the meaning?
Beyond.
Okay, beyond, yeah. Beyond a lot of things. Now, if all you said was, what's the meaning of Pala? Beyond, would you be correct? See, that's the thing, because if all you said, it just means beyond, it's like, well, beyond what? So that word in itself does help define Pala, but if someone asks you, what's the definition of, Pala, and you said beyond, it's like, well, now they're going to use that word improperly, because they think like, I went above and beyond, to it's like, well, maybe. Actually, that could be a little bit true, The love Jonathan had towards me was above and beyond, right? There you go. The work that God did was Pala. It was, wondrous what he did. Any other takes? What else have we gathered about Pala or what it means? Peculiar. Special. Extraordinary, for sure. There's a couple of those interesting uses in relation to man, such as Amnon's inability to do the evil deed that he pleased to do with his sister, right? And from the negative sense, inability, right? So it's like, okay, that still somehow has to be taken with the meaning. So ability versus inability is a part of it, sure. Or David using that word to describe Jonathan, or the Israelite taking that vow, right? Extraordinary. And so in the noun form, as we saw earlier, it was reserved only for God. In the verb form, or adverb, it's mostly for God, but also was used for extraordinary or wonderful vows or a few other rare instances. So that's the first word. I wanted to go more in depth for that one. The rest of them we're going to go a lot quicker, right? But that one I wanted to go in depth and look at a lot of the verses and try to have us formulate definitions based off of that. But the next word in the Old Testament that someone might think of as a miracle is the word ot. You know this word? No. Oh, okay. I saw you like, oh, you're repeating? Okay. This pronunciation, the truth is we don't know how any of this stuff is pronounced. It was thousands of years ago, and there's no audio recording of how they spoke, right? So if anyone says, that's not the right pronunciation, you tell them, oh yeah, and how do you know what the right pronunciation is? You know, you can't. People just standardize it and make it up as they go, right? How do you pronounce it? Apple, apple. Someone just standardized it at some point, but no one standardized the pronunciation 4,000 years ago. So, ot. O-T. O-T. It's a noun, and this word basically means sign. Sign, which is often describing miracles, right? These signs in the Old Testament. Ot. I'll give you just a couple examples. We won't go through all of them. Genesis 4:15, God put a sign on Cain. Now, someone might say, that's not a miracle. Well, I mean, did the sign get there on its own? God put it there. It's a miracle, you know. Hey, but hold on. Is ot always something that you would describe as a miracle? Not necessarily, because Joshua 2:12, Rahab asked the two spies for a ot that they will spare her and her family. What was the ot? The sign, which was, yeah, tie this red thing. Yeah, there you go. What does that have to do with a miracle? Not much. I mean, eventually there was a miracle surrounding that. The fact that their house did not crumble and they did not die, that was good. And they were spared, yeah. But the thing in itself, was there anything miraculous about it? Not at the moment, right? Exodus 12:13, the blood of the lamb for the Passover shall be a ot on the houses, a sign. Interesting, right? Psalm 86, verse 17, a prayer to God, right? And he says, show me a sign, an ot, for good, that those who hate me may see it and be ashamed. Here's Job 21:29. Have you not asked those who travel the road, and do you not know their ot? Do you not know their signs? Now this verse is like, what are we talking about here? Okay, well the context is Job is talking to his friends, and he's saying pretty much, go ask anyone on the road, and they're going to tell you what I'm telling you. Right? Go on the road, and they're gonna give you the sign. You're gonna see it. Okay. So metaphorically, meaning them as a witness, they're gonna witness to what I'm saying to you. This will be a sign to you. I'm saying this. If you go and ask literally anybody on the road, that'll be a sign to you that I'm right. Right. So I could give you a bunch more, but that pretty much covers it pretty quickly. What does it mean in English? Actually, we have a really great word to translate what? Sign. And it's pretty much exactly what it means. It's so accurate. Like you could just take the word sign almost every single time ot is there, and you will not get a bad translation for the verse. It's fascinating. It's actually pretty good. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's good. Because like whereas the other word we were just talking about, if you put wonder for all the translations, there's a lot of verses where that really doesn't make sense, you know. But this one translates really well, which is good. So we don't have to spend too much time on it. But here's another one. 1 Samuel 10:7. Samuel's telling Saul the signs, the ots, that will indicate to Saul that the Lord has anointed him. Again, sign. This is a sign. I need a sign. Okay, here's a sign. So long story short, it's a word. It's used to describe. Here's a couple more ways it's translated. It's translated as banner. What's a banner? A sign, right? It's translated as omen. What's an omen? A sign. It's translated mostly as sign, literally. Often there's a stone, that's the ot. This is a sign. Let's put up this stone. It'll be a sign. You know, literally, let's put up a sign. It'll be a sign. Tokens, objects. But also there are times when in certain verses where there's an action or an event that takes place, which will be the sign. But guess what? In English, it works perfectly well. Sign. That's what it is. It's a signal. And it's not a word reserved for God. It just simply means sign. I can give you a sign. You know, so sign. But sometimes in the Old Testament, God performed a sign, which was a miracle, which was supernatural, which could not happen on its own, which required God's direct intervention, and that was a sign. So a miracle often is a sign. Is it ever not a sign? Someone might argue a miracle is always a sign of something. It is. What do signs do? Long story short, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but what is the point of a sign? To express some truth to you about whatever it is. Here's a sign that you will be king and that God has anointed you. Oh, great, now I know this truth. The sign has confirmed this, right? Here is a sign that I am with you. Your rod turned into snake, there you go, right? And this has expressed some truth. It confirmed some truth, right? The next word is, third word, 2.5. The third word is Geburah, Geburah, Geburah. It is a noun, and it means strength or might or power or all of the above. Strength, might, power, Geburah. So based on the NAS, Exhaustive Concordance, their definition is strength, might. NASB translation translates the word as courage. Another time it translates it as might, 26 times. It translated one time as mighty, 3 times as mighty acts, 4 times as mighty deeds, 1 time as mighty ones, 1 time as mighty strength, 9 times as power, 13 times as strength, 1 time as strong, 1 time as triumph, but mostly it's might or strength. And all of those other words have to do with might or strength, used in some way. Strong's Exhaustive Concordance gives the definition, the usage as force, mastery, might, mighty act, power, strength, powers, and that it comes from Hebrew word Gibor. Anyone remember El Gibor and what that means? El Gibor. Remember when we were studying the names of God? El, right? El, short for Elohim. And then there's Gibor, which is really mighty God. El Gibor, right? That was just one of them. Oh, it's a while ago, right? There's a whole bunch of them. There's Adonai, there's El, there's Yahweh, the big 3 ones in the Old Testament. And so you'll have Adonai, which means Lord. You'll have El, which is difficult to translate, but it has to do with might, his greatness, God. And then there's Yahweh, which is similar to the verb in Hebrew to be. He is. I am that I am. It translates in English, right? Anyways, comes from Hebrew word Gibor, which is the adjective that means strong or mighty, which doesn't only describe God. Again, this word can describe a strong person or mighty army, right? But that's what the word means, might, power, strength, whatever synonyms you want to use. The Hebrew word gabar is the verb that means strong or mighty. So it means the same thing, might, strength, Geburah. And often it talks about God's mights, right? His mighty deeds. And it's in reference to what he did in Egypt, for instance, a mighty deed that he did. And it's like, well, this is a miracle. But it's not always referring to a miracle. The last one, Old Testament word, that is used to describe miracles is Mophet. Mopheth. I don't know how to pronounce it. Mopheth. M-O-P-H-E-T. And that's a noun. And it basically means, now I'm going to feel like I'm repeating myself, but it has the basic meaning of wonder or sign. We already talked about wonder, didn't we? We already talked about sign, didn't we? Yeah, but this word also kind of means that, okay? Hey, you can have synonyms in Hebrew, it's okay. We have synonyms in English too. Or portent. And a portent is more like a warning. Typically that something bad is going to happen, right? And it's used frequently with ought. It'll say, ready? Ought and mophet. What do you think that is in English? No. Ought and mophet. Oughts and mophets. Huh? Yeah, signs and wonders. How many times do you see in the Old Testament? Signs and wonders, signs and wonders, signs and wonders, signs and wonders, yeah. And it's usually ought and mophet, ought and mophet. And you know what, the funny thing, mophet can sometimes be translated sign, sometimes can be translated wonder. And then ought is almost always translated sign. So a more literal translation could possibly be signs and signs. Signs and wonders. Signs and portents, right? It's like, what are we saying here? Signs and wonders. It's just kind of it seems to be this phrase that describes what it is, right? Strong's Concordance defines it as a wonder or sign or portent and miracle. NAS, same definition. And in the NAS, it'll translate the word as marvel, or marvels, or miracle, or mostly signs, and most of the time, wonders. Signs and wonders. So that pretty much summarizes the Old Testament words usage. Moving on to the New Testament. The first word we want to bring up is teras. T-E-R-A-S. Teras. That word basically means wonder, or marvel, or portent. Very similar to what we just talked about. And pretty quickly you're going to catch on that the New Testament words are very closely associated with the Old Testament words. It's almost like it's a translation of some of the Old Testament words, and your job is to guess which one it is. Helps Word Studies defines teras as a miraculous wonder done to elicit a reaction from onlookers, an extraordinary event with its supernatural effect left on all witnessing it. By the way, this is just some guy that decided to make a definition based off of what we did earlier. You look at all the verses that use this word. You look at all the usage, and it's used 16 times, translated as, it's 16 times in the New Testament. And you look at all those usages, and you say, okay, based off this usages, what is the definition? You come up with that definition. NAS defines it as a wonder, a marvel. All 16 times in the NAS is translated as wonders. So whenever you see like signs and wonders, there it is. There's teras. Something interesting is that the word teras never occurs by itself. What word does it usually occur with? Teras means wonders. What words does it usually occur with? Signs. The Greek word for that, which we haven't said yet, it's semeion, or semeion. S-E-M-E-I-O-N, okay? Signs. It's always used with that. Just like in the Old Testament, you have ot and mophet, signs and wonders. In the New Testament, you have, how often does it say Jesus did signs and wonders? He performed signs and wonders amongst them, right? Signs and wonders. There you go. Semeion and teras. Signs and wonders. So that'll bring us to our next word, which is for sign. S-E-M-E-I-O-N. And I'm butchering the pronunciation, but semeion. If you think you know a better pronunciation, please say it. If anyone's good at that, pronouncing like the Greek letters, I'm not. You in the back, are you good at pronouncing the Greek letters? Okay, great. So Strong's Concordance defines semeion, we'll say semeion for sign. It defines it as a sign. Just like in the Old Testament, ot, a sign. And in English, the word sign. So semeion is sign. That's what it is. And sometimes the word is translated as a sign or a miracle or an indication or a mark. Right? There you go. But all of those things are what? Signs. They are a sign. Helps Word Studies tells us this. It gives us a little pronunciation. Semeion, probably C. Semeion is a sign, typically miraculous, given especially to confirm, corroborate, or authenticate, emphasizes the end purpose which exalts the one giving it. That last idea is the purpose of whatever's being done. It emphasizes the purpose. What is a sign? It has a purpose. It is pointing towards some truth, right? Or someone, or something. There's a purpose behind it, right? So I'll jump ahead of myself again a little bit, but you can think of it like this. A miracle, a sign, a wonder. What is wonder? This has more to do with, although it is used as a noun, although it is used as an adjective, an adverb, right? A sign has to do with what it's pointing towards, what it's telling you, right? Jesus went and did this miracle, and this was a sign. Why does it always have signs and wonders right next to each other? Because that same act is a sign, is a wonder, is a miracle, is a healing, is a this, right? It is all of those at once. It is a sign in the sense that it points towards this truth, that it points to something. This is a sign that Jesus is the Messiah, right? This is a sign that he has come from God, right? It is a wonder in the sense that it is extraordinary, that it is beyond ability, that it is miraculous. So basically the word means sign, semeion, and it points towards something, right? It is a sign. It gives you some information. It's not valuable in and of itself, but the information that it's pointing you towards. Just like the Hebrew word what, they're the equivalents. Next word is dunamis. Dunamis sounds like an English word. Dynamite, thank you. Yeah, dynamite. What do you think it means? Power, might. That's where the word comes from. Okay, I'm lying to you. Okay, it's not where the word dynamite comes from. It has a whole bunch of, the etymology is a completely different path. But it's a good way to remember it. Dynamite, if you see the Greek word dunamis, it's like, oh, dynamite. Yeah, power, might. Yeah, the etymology follows a different path to get there, but it's okay. It means power, strength, might, right? So the Strong's Concordance will give us this: miraculous power, might, or strength. And the usage is like this. It uses it as a physical power or force or might or ability or efficacy or energy even. And in the plural, it'll be for powerful deeds or deeds showing power or marvelous works. All of these different words having to do with might, power, strength. Helps word studies gives us dunamis from dunamai, meaning able or having ability, right? Like you have the power. I have the power to do this. I have the might. I have the strength. I can lift this because I have the power. Able to perform. For the believer, it is power to achieve by applying the Lord's inherent abilities. Now that definition comes from the many times, usually Paul, uses the word dunamis, right, to describe a believer. And in the English, often it will say God's power working in you, right? God's power, his might, his strength. And it's describing the believer is empowered through the Holy Spirit, right? God's power working in you to accomplish, to do what you cannot do, but God can do through you. Power through God's ability. Sanctification. Paul always uses it with dunamis, God's power to empower. Empower, powerful, mighty. All of these, it's the word dunamis that is used to describe all of that. It's used 120 times in the New Testament, much more than the other words that we actually saw. So you don't want to ignore it. NAS Concordance, miraculous, power, might, strength. And here's all the different ways it's translated in the NAS. 4 times, ability. 1 time, meaning. Now, that's kind of a little different, but it's interesting. 1 time, mightily. 1 time, mighty. 2 times, miracle. 17 times, miracles. 3 times, miraculous powers. 83 times, power. 6 times, powers. 2 times, strength. 1 time, wealth. So the word has the idea of power. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we have to get going, but I just wanted to thank you for, you've done clearly so much preparation work for this, and it's been super enlightening. So thank you.
Ah, that's so sad.
I wish we could stay, but.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, where are you guys from?
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah?
Yeah, we met. Do you know Leela?
Layla?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking to her for a minute, and she invited us.
Yes. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. I wish, we had more time to meet you guys, but, I hope you guys, hopefully that's okay, and,
You do these every Monday, right?
we do, yeah.
Okay. Wolfsby. Yeah, okay.
All right. Well, God bless you guys. You guys have a great day.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, no problem. I'm glad you guys could be. So the word has the idea of power, ability, miracles. And again, it's not referring to the act itself, but it's referring to the power behind it. So now we see signs, we see wonders, and then we see dunamis. And so when Jesus does a miracle, he heals, there is God's dunamis behind it in order for it to be able to happen. There is what it tells you, which is the sign. It is a sign. And then there is the wonder it produces within you, because it is a wonder, right? And so a miracle is a sign. It is a wonder. It is God's power on display. So it points to the cause. It points to the source. Now, what Hebrew word is that similar to? Geburah, that we saw, might, power. It's, as a matter of fact, if you look in the Septuagint, the Greek translation, you will see that they will translate the Hebrew term Geburah to dunamis. They will translate the Hebrew word ot, which means sign, to simeon, right? So the Septuagint kind of helps to cheat a little bit with translation, but it's good. It's good. One more word in the Greek that is sometimes associated with miracles, and it's the word ergon, E-R-G-O-N, ergon. It's a noun, and it means, it's almost every single time it's translated as work, works, 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 deeds, right? It has the idea of tasks, deeds, works, actions, labors, and it has that meaning. But often it's referring to the works that Jesus performed. Jesus did these works among them, and it's referring to the miracles, supernatural works. And so the word works in itself doesn't necessarily mean miracle, because we are not saved by our works. We do these deeds, we do these works. It's the same word, but yet there are supernatural works, and then there's natural works. So like John 15:24, for example, if I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. But now that they have seen and hated both me and my Father. But now that they have seen and hated both me and my Father, right, moving on, okay. So the context is meaning that Jesus performed these works that only God could do. He did miracles amongst them. Therefore, those that rejected Christ were rejecting the Father, is the context, these works that he did. That's the last term. So we went through all of the terms, Old Testament and New Testament, that have anything to do with miracle. To summarize, Pele has the general meaning of wonders. Ot has the general meaning of sign. Geburah has the meaning of might or power. Mofet means wonders or signs. And so when you say signs and wonders, you say ot and mofet. In the New Testament, there's the Greek words that basically have the same meanings. So teros means wonders, similar to the Hebrew word mofet. Simeon basically means signs. So you would say signs and wonders, Simeon and teros, ot and mofet. And then dunamis means power or might, equivalent to the Hebrew word geburah. And finally, the New Testament Greek ergon, basic meaning of works. So those are all the terms in the Old and New Testament that are used to describe what someone today might simply call a miracle. Someone might say, oh, that was a miracle. But the Bible doesn't have one word for miracle. It has these different words that have different meanings. You can't use those words interchangeably because you're saying something else. Just like in English, if I said that was a sign versus that was a wonder, those are two different meanings, right? Yeah, but it could be referring to the same event, the same action, the same thing that occurred, but these are different words referring to different aspects, perhaps, or different things related to the miracle. Often today, many Christians will simply use the word miracle as an all-encompassing term. Now, what do you guys think of that? Any thoughts? Because I have had some thoughts after doing this whole word study. I had some thoughts about these words and maybe some application. Any thoughts, guys? Okay, we are being inaccurate. I agree. I think, but not just with the word miracles, I think there might be a lot of terms as Christians we're not being precise enough with what we mean when we're saying something, right? Does that mean we have to do a word study for every single word? Well, you don't have all the time to do that, but that your words would carry more precisely true meaning, I think is an important application as a believer, right? We ought to speak truth. We ought to convey truth. We ought to be able to defend the truth, explain the truth. In order to do that, you need to be accurate and precise with your words. You do, right? And so an application for me is I realize, okay, you can really mislead people by not being accurate with your words, by not being precise with your words. It could be extremely misleading, right? And so we ought to strive to be able to convey truth to people using our words.
Should we just not be using the word miracle at all, though? Because it's not even found.
I like that thought. Should we just not use the word miracle at all because it's not even biblical technically? The word itself is not based off of the etymology of a Greek word or a Hebrew word.
I disagree with that.
You disagree with that. You think we should use the word miracle.
I think in order to properly communicate with the current status of everyone's vocabulary, the use of miracle should still be used in certain contexts.
Okay.
Understand what you're saying.
Yeah. The word miracle must be used because people use it. And you need to be able to, I would say, define it, right? I would be,
They have to be able to understand what you're saying.
exactly. Well, knowing that people have very, very different definitions of even the word miracle, I would be a little bit careful with how I use it. I would like to use that as an opportunity to say, hey, let's talk about miracles. What exactly do you mean by that? It's like, oh, a miracle happened yesterday. Oh, what happened yesterday? Right? Yeah.
Since the Bible, I guess, kind of, okay, so all those terms could mean miracle. So it seems like that word is being used in a broad sense, in my opinion. So like, I feel like then in that case, it's not wrong to just say miracle, because all of those different words just kind of stack.
Mm-hmm.
So it like, I don't know, we start off saying like that we need to be more precise, but and I feel like it's kind of the opposite in a sense, because like there's just all these different words.
Okay, so you're saying there's all these different words, and miracle seems to be this umbrella term that we might not have to be more precise. We could use that to convey all of that meaning.
I feel like if anything, it's proof that you can use it more broadly.
So you think it's proof that you can use the word miracles more broadly? Okay,
At least for me.
interesting. So this is like a very big topic, words. And some people might say, oh, this is really boring. This isn't important. Why do you need to know this? It's semantics. Well, if you call it semantics, everyone falls asleep. But if you say, this is how you communicate between one another, this is how you convey truth. How do you teach something to someone? Words. What do they think that word means? What do you think that word means? We're expressing truths. We're expressing ideas, right? And you need to be able to do that. And a big application, I think, is knowing what this person thinks this word means, right? That's difficult to do, but it's something you do have to do when you're talking to someone, right? You need to consider the fact that you might think this is the meaning, and you might think you're explaining to them perfectly based off your words, but then they're getting a completely different message, especially when you ask them to paraphrase what you just said. If they think, well, because if someone thinks that miracle is only something supernatural beyond the norm of nature, right? And then there's someone else that sees miracle as whenever God acts and does something, right? Right? And then someone's going to say, oh, I prayed and then I passed my test. And then someone else is going to hear that and say, oh, a miracle, right? And someone else is going to say, well, no, that was not a miracle. Okay, was it a miracle or not? There's a disagreement there, but the information can be conveyed and passed along differently based off of what you think the word means. So, those words in the Bible are not all synonyms, right? Can we go around and say, here was a sign, this was a wonder, this is a this, right? What do we do with that? Like, what do we do with the information that we learned today? How could this be useful? Other than, I felt that even just the practice of trying to do a word study, to see the usage of a word in the Old and New Testament and how definitions come about for words, I thought that was helpful just to demonstrate in itself, right? That right there, even if you got nothing about the miracles from it, but you just saw an example of how words, and it is helpful and useful to think in those terms, to not get so caught up in your translation in English, and then you're going to see that one word, and then all of a sudden you preach a whole sermon based off that one English translated word, and then there's another 5 translations in English with different words. It's like, well, hold on. Right? Yeah, you need to go to the original language, Greek, Hebrew, and get the idea. And even then, you don't just take that Greek word and Google, what does Simeon mean? And then say it means this. And then you got to be careful with that. What is the message? What is the meaning behind it? I think that's a big application too with hermeneutics, really. That's an important thing to do. And you're not going to do that every single time you read a single word in the Bible. But sometimes it it could prove really useful to do that on a small scale, Even to just quickly go and, you're looking at a word and you're like, you know what? I'm coming across this word. I would like to get more understanding of this word. A very easy, quick thing to do. Not everybody has a physical resources, but you do have the internet. You can look up concordance, or you can even do something like, this verse, Luke 14:2, Greek interlinear, and click first link. Now there are different interlinears. That's okay. You'll figure it out eventually. You click on it. It shows you the verse. Every single word in there is going to be with the Greek word and then like a really bad English translation that's more literal. And then you just click on that Greek word, and all of a sudden it brings you to a concordance, and then it brings you to every usage of the word, and then it gives you some definitions, and then you start like, I'm overloaded with information. But it's a helpful start. It really is, and it can prove really useful sometimes, right? To help you figure out what the word actually means. Or a really quick cheater method that I do is I have like an app, right? And I'll just click on it, and then it'll show you like 6 different translations. And sometimes that can help because it's not helpful when all the translations have the same word, but it is helpful when all the translations have a different word, because that just goes to show that the word itself being used in the original language is not properly conveyed with one of those words, right? That's useful. The fact that you have 4 translations, like I gave that one verse where there was 6 different translations with 6 different words. And that is helpful because it helps you show that this word itself, it means something that's really difficult to convey in this verse. And it was the word we were looking at, pala, right? And when it was used in the negative sense, right? It's like, well, how is this? It's terrible. It's an atrocity. It's a terrible thing that this king is going to be doing towards this. Anyways, so what happens if you put all those words together? And another question is, if we want to define the word miracle, is it valid for us to take all those words and put it together and say this is the definition? How do we decide what the definition is? Is there a way for us to decide this is the definition? If it's a word that's not originated from the Bible, it's a word used to describe something that is biblical in a sense, but it's a word that doesn't come from the Bible. You can't take one word and say this word means miracle. Sure, the translations might say that, but the etymology is a little different. So theologians are divided on this question, okay? There are different views. Some will go ahead and say that the correct definition, and the only definition that we can have a biblical conviction towards, is if we define it using all the terms and usages of anything that has to do with miracles, like what we just did, all these Old Testament, New Testament words, take them, put them together, and say, this is a miracle, right? Some theologians will say this is the only way you can define it. Other theologians will say, no, that's not fair. You're being too restrictive because you're forcing that word miracle to encompass all of that at once, when it might not necessarily encompass that. Because if you take all 4 of those words in the Old and New Testament and take that meaning and apply it to any single one of those verses, most of the time, all of a sudden, that verse is not actually containing that meaning, right? If miracle means all 4 of that at once, often you can't insert the word miracle into most of those anymore. Like Jonathan's love towards David. Miracle? Sure, whenever you're talking about God, you could say miracle and get away with it, right? But when it's describing, this shall be a miracle to you that you, Saul, are going to be king. No, it's a sign with the clear meaning of sign. It's indicating something. You can't just use miracle for all of those. So, well, what happens if you do put those words together? And some people do use that to define miracle. And so here's a definition I found that I think is an interesting definition that a lot of theologians would agree with. And I'll just read it to you and then try to dissect it. A miracle is an observable phenomenon delivered powerfully by God, so power, dunamis, powerfully by God, directly or through an authorized agent, so either God himself does it or he works through someone, okay? Power, whose extraordinary, there's the key word, extraordinary character captures the immediate attention, there's the wonder produced in a person, it's producing wonder, or of the viewer, right, that's teros, It points to something beyond the phenomenon, talking about the fact that it's a sign, semeion, and is a distinctive work whose source can be attributed to no one else but God. Right? The power is God, supernatural. Man cannot do it. It's a work of God, ergon. So you're kind of putting all of that into one thing. And it sounds like a good way to define a word. The problem is, how can you get everybody to agree that that's the definition of miracle? People disagree.
I mean, I have to say, arguably, you can't get anyone to agree on everything. That's why we have all these denominations.
You can't get everyone to agree on anything. I agree. It's just, this is something a step further detached from hermeneutics. This is not like asking the question, how many words are in this verse? There's a way to objectively answer that. This is something of like, I don't even know, like how do you even answer this question? This is subjective. This is similar to the question of what translation is the best in English, or what word is the best English word to use here to translate from the Greek, right? Because language changes over time, and so that answer will change over time, right? But the word miracle is exactly that question. The word miracle changes over time and its meaning. And so that's the question we're answering. And it's something that can change and something that can be different. And so if you look at a theologian giving you information about the word miracle 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 200 years ago, it's also more difficult because the word meant something else back then. And English language was different back then. And it evolves over time. So translating, interpreting, right, the Bible from language to language is something that it is constantly changing, right? The landscape, really. And it's something that's why you always have to go back to the original Greek. That's why you always have to go back to the original Hebrew. And it's something that people are going to disagree on for all time, right? How to properly translate. There's really nothing you can do about it. But here, theologians might define biblical miracles as this: God suspending natural laws and personally reaching into life to rearrange people and their circumstances according to his will. And that has the idea of there are natural laws that God has, and yet he suspends them, meaning goes beyond what is natural law, right? Natural law says Peter should sink in the water, right? But God's suspending that law. Goes beyond it. And God is the one personally doing it. Okay. So you could differentiate the different works of God. There are God's original works of creation. Is creation a miracle? Well, if we can't agree on the definition of miracle, I don't know how you answer that question. But is creation, a sign, a wonder by God's power? Yeah, absolutely, right? In that sense, it passes. Well, how about providence that we just talked about for a long time? God acting in someone's life to orchestrate something in a way, is that a miracle? Is all of everything God does a miracle in a certain sense? What's the difference between a miracle and providence? Are all miracles providence? Is all providence miracles? Is all providence miraculous? Well, we could think about providence as God acting to bring about or seeing to that his will is accomplished, right? So if God does a miracle, that is included in providence, in the definition of providence. So every miracle God did is a part of providence. Whenever a miracle has occurred, whatever God has ever done is providence. Okay, so miracles are included in providence. But the terms are not interchangeable because it's referring to different things. A miracle is an act. It's a part of God's providence, but not all of providence is miracle. There are God's acts of providence, and it can be divided into two categories. Two groups. One is natural providence. The other would be supernatural. One is that which is within the laws of nature that God has ordained, and the other is that which surpasses. And so seeing to it that a certain event occurs at a certain time or place, that's not necessarily a miracle, right? If it was, then every single thing that ever happened, every single moment, every single atom is a miracle. and now the word no longer has any meaning, right? No, that's providence, actually, what we're referring to. Miracle, in the Bible, they don't refer to everything as a miracle. They refer to it as seemingly when the God clearly acting, and from their perspective, it is God now directly intervening and doing something. But we know from providence perspective that God is always doing something. And so there's a difference there with miracle versus providence. A supernatural, right, above nature, miraculous work of God, defying the laws of nature, that's what we might call a miracle. And if you don't make that distinction, I'm still asking this question, but if you don't make that distinction between miracle and providence, between supernatural and natural, and you allow a miracle to be something that is natural, how then is not everything a miracle then? I see that to be a problem. If you define miracle as something that is not necessarily supernatural, if you allow naturally occurring events to be considered miraculous, how then do you differentiate between two naturally occurring events and saying this one's a miracle, this one's not? There is no way to do that anymore. The line gets blurred. There's no clear distinction, and everything's a miracle, right? And so I think that's a fair argument for a miracle having to be supernatural, having to be something beyond the laws of nature, having to be God suspending the laws of nature. For example, healing. God's providence is involved in any single time you were sick and are no longer sick, healed. Would you call that a miracle? Maybe not, right? But then there's Jesus, blind man now sees. You say, that's a miracle, for sure, right? It did not occur on its own. That was God's power working to bring about something that would not have occurred naturally, right? How about conversion, salvation? Well, by biblical definition, miracle. So there is healing that is providence, that's not a miracle, and there is healing that is miracle. What's the difference? It could not occur naturally, right? Okay. Another question that I guess we could explore further in the future is, since we're short on time, but I'll just, kind of throw it out there, hopefully to entice. Do miracles make people spiritual? The quick answer is no, they do not. Israelites saw a lot of miracles, and then the second they got out of Egypt, idolatry. Jesus fed 5,000 with miraculous bread and fish, and the same chapter, right after that, most of them departed, permanently withdrew. So, there are other theologians that disagree with this definition of miracle. And they would say that a miracle is anything God does to bring awe or wonder or bearing witness or pointing towards God. And that they would feel that the other definition that we brought up is incorrect in some ways. And so, next time, we will be more conclusive. And we did the dirty work of looking at the etymology and the words and the big word studies, and I thought that would be interesting. We're not repeating that next time. We're going to move on to a lot of interesting questions about miracles, and we're going to get a lot of good conclusions. And I do believe we did learn something today about the Old and New Testament and words, and we saw an example of hermeneutics that we could hopefully apply in some way. And so these are the works of God that inspire awe, they inspire wonder within people who witness these signs, these works of God that are performed by God's might, by God's power. And there are still many more questions about miracles that we will be trying to answer next time. But on that note, why don't we stand and pray? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord God. Thank you for all of your might, for all of your power, for your goodness, for your faithfulness, for your infinite wisdom, and for your knowledge. We thank you for your plans. We thank you for your good and perfect will, which is better than our plans, better than our will, better than our understanding. And your thoughts are not my thoughts. Our understanding is not your understanding. Lord, we ask that your will would be done, that whatever plans you've had for us, for this church, for all the churches, for your bride, for this world, that you would bring it about, that you would see to it that your will be done. And Lord, whatever we learned here today, may you use it in our lives. May this knowledge be taken by you